Hello everybody, recording live from somewhere. This is Zach Couples with episode number 63 of the Movement Debrief. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, I am proudly bringing to you some ill shit. We're going to talk about breathing. How do you coach this? What are normal respiratory mechanics? How can I make it mo better so my clients can get their goals mo easier? We're going to talk about the thoracic spine. What's the deal with that? How does that present with certain peeps who have this infrasternal angle versus the other? What you gonna do about it? Stay tuned. Last but not least, we're gonna talk about, when is it safe to load? Do I need 32 degrees of IR or 36? The answers to all of those questions will occur in today's debrief, folks. These are questions that are asked from the people, answered for the people, by this people, fam, recognized fans. Before I dive in, if you want to know how to maybe improve thoracic spine mobility with your people so they can reach their goals and maybe pressing all types of wild and crazy weight, or maybe, you're a little tight in the low back or the mid-back or the neck, doesn't really matter, and you want to use some of the stuff we talked about today, then you probably want to attend the Human Matrix because it's coming your way. 4 locations as of right now. This month, October 27th to 28th in Kansas City, Missouri. Be there. If you can't be there, then go to Portland, Oregon, November 10th and 11th. If you can't be there, then you probably want to go to Charleston, South Carolina, December 8th and 9th. And if you can't be there, for crying out loud, at least make it to New Jersey, February 2nd and 3rd. Those are the places where the debrief will be. I hope to see you all there. Without further ado, let's debrief, shall we? The first question comes from, your name is in characters, bro, so I can't really say what it is. But it looks like it starts with the letter M, so we'll call you M. M writes, "Hi Zach, I'd like to ask you a very good question. You often say that low ribs shouldn't move anteriorly, but if upper ribs move anteriorly and superiorly in pump handle mechanics, so does the sternum. Low ribs attach to the sternum, so they should also move anteriorly. And pressure in abdominals pushes the belly and thus the lower ribs outside. Please help me understand this." M, an unbelievable question. Let me do my best to help you understand that. There's three types of mechanics that we consider when we're talking about how the rib cage moves during inhalation and exhalation. Those 3 mechanics are the pump handle. What the pump handle is the rib cage moves anteriorly and superiorly when I take a breath of air in, like a pump handle. If you need a better visual, they will be in the show notes, which will be featured on ZachCouples.com tomorrow. Pics. The second thing, this is bucket handle. That's where the ribs go laterally and superiorly upon inhalation. The last thing is posterior thorax expansion. This is where the rib cage moves posteriorly and superiorly. Those 3 actions happen in the rib cage at every level. The key, though, is that there are certain areas where these rib cage mechanics are more prominent and certain areas where they're maybe not so prominent. If we go back to pump handle, the primary location where pump handle occurs is where the sternum attaches, which is ribs 1 through 7, where those guys attach. So there's your breathe in, anterior and superior movement of the rib cage. There is a degree of pump handle in the lower ribs. We're talking 8 through 12. But one point of contention is those ribs technically do not attach to the sternum. They are false ribs, 8, 9, and 10. And those guys have kind of an indirect attachment to the sternum. So they have a little bit more flexibility than, say, 1 through 7, which move as a cohesive unit. Therefore, the pump handle activity of those ribs is significantly less than they would be at 1 through 7. For the bucket handle, You want to flip-flop that. There is bucket handle capabilities in the upper ribs, but it is much greater in the lower ribs. We're talking 8 through 12, because they have fewer constraints, i.e. they're not attached to the sternum, greater degrees of freedom, and that allows for more movement of that superior and lateral expansion. Posterior thorax, that's pretty much all of them. There's not really a constraint with that type of expansion. So to summarize that, front side, upper ribs, pump handle, lower ribs, heavy in the bucket handle, posterior thorax, the whole kit and caboodle. Now that we understand that, how do we coach that type of breathing style? You have to look at how people screw this up and don't really respect any of those mechanics. When people breathe in, what happens oftentimes is they will let the lower ribs come up and out or migrate, which is really happening superiorly. When the rib cage migrates superiorly as a unit, you get increased accessory muscle tone. The diaphragm descends a little bit further than we'd probably like, and you're not getting that 360-degree expansion of the rib cage. This is also limiting how we develop intra-abdominal pressure, or where the guts go every time I take a breath of air in. Under normal circumstances, what should happen is as we breathe in, the guts should be pushed downward and against the entire abdominal cavity in a 360-degree fashion, and then the pelvic floor should descend and catch the goods. When I am in a scenario where I'm hiking the rib cage up, a lot of times what that will do is the guts will migrate more anteriorly and not get as good displacement in the lateral aspects of the abdominal wall or the posterior aspect of the abdominal wall, and it might alter how things go downstairs towards the pelvic floor. So if I'm allowing things to migrate superiorly, I am not getting intrathoracic and intra-abdominal pressure in an effective manner. That could potentially be related to some of the movement limitations we see. So how do you coach it? I'm glad you asked. Coaching breathing mechanics. The biggest key that you can do is make sure that after someone lets out a complete exhalation, whether that's if you're a narrow infrasternal angle, which if you don't know what that is, I'll link it in the show notes, or a wide. If you're narrow, we're talking in a long sigh to drop the rib cage down to maximize the zone of apposition, which is the amount of diaphragm tissue that lays next to the rib cage. Or if I'm a wide infrasternal angle, forceful for the same reasons, we want to get the diaphragm in a good position, or the rib cage in a good position, to allow the diaphragm to maximally ascend, and then we want to maintain that position as best as possible to allow that 360-degree expansion in the thorax and in the abdominal region. That's where keeping the lower rib cage minimally moving A to P, or really superior to inferior, is beneficial. Because if we don't do that, then we're not going to get the expansion that we so desire. Big keys to coaching that. Exhale however you need to. Pause for about a 3 to 5 second count. Hold this lower rib cage still. Easy in. What your people will find, and maybe yourself, is that, oh crap fam, I can't get as much air in as I could before. Good. What's happening in those cases is you're pushing air into areas where maybe there is a limitation or maybe a concentric orientation. You probably need the expansion in that region. So make sure that your clients are well aware that that suffocation sensation is normal, and if they get better at breathing within that strategy, that should subside with time. So to summarize, the normal mechanics, pump handle, anterior superior migration of the rib cage happens mostly in the upper ribs. Bucket handle, posterior lateral and superior migration of the rib cage happens mostly in the lower ribs. Posterior thorax happens in the whole rib cage, and the ribs migrate posteriorly and superiorly. When we're coaching breathing, get your full exhale. You want to keep the lower rib cage still so you don't get superior migration of the rib cage as a cohesive unit on the inhale. And if you do those things, you ought to be in business. So M, unbelievable question. Nice job. The next question comes from Kevin. Kevin writes, can you explain, no wait, excuse me, Big Z. Can you, if you want me to answer your emails, started with Big Z. Can you explain why some people present with a flat upper T-spine and a wide infrasternal angle, whereas others present with a flat upper T-spine and a narrow infrasternal angle? It makes sense to me that someone with a wide infrasternal angle could have a flat upper T-spine, which is an extended position. But when I see it on someone who's narrow, I can't quite make sense of this. Well, Kevin, allow me to attempt to make sense of this. Let's talk about normal mechanics of breathing, but let's talk about the thoracic spine. This region, right? Yeah. So you can see at rest, the thoracic spine has a normal degree of kyphosis, meaning that if I am inside checking this out, it's concave. When I breathe in, what should happen is that kyphosis should increase. And I can't do it with this, well maybe. There you go. So it gets a little bit more bendy on the inhale. During the exhale, that kyphosis ought to get reduced. So it's a little bit straighter. Those are normal mechanics. Now you can understand where we would get potentially get certain presentations with a narrow versus a wide infrasternal angle, i.e. compensatory mechanics, if you understand the concept that typically the sacrum and the thorax ought to match. Reason being, the curves are similar. Just like I have a lordosis in my lumbar spine and I have a lordosis in my cervical spine, I have a kyphosis in my thoracic spine and a kyphosis in my sacrum. So let's pull out a good old pelvis. Upon inhalation, what happens is the sacrum counternutates and I get a corresponding anterior rotation of the innominate. On the exhalation, the sacrum ought to nutate and the innominate ought to posteriorly rotate. That's normal mechanics. Now let's talk about wide infrasternal angle and wide infrapubic angle first. In compensatory mechanics, we say that there's a loss of dynamic movement in both of these angles and they match. If I'm a wide infrasternal angle, the infrapubic angle ought to also be wide. This wide infrapubic angle leads to posterior rotation of these innominates at the SI joint. Boom. I also have sacral nutation. So I'm in an exhale position in the pelvis. If I have sacral nutation, then most likely what's going to happen is actually, and I've spoken about this in error, but thank you Daddy-O Pops for correcting me on this. But what should happen in the thoracic spine is I should have an exhale position in the thoracic spine. So it's going to be more flat. So this is going to move this way into more of a forward direction. Actually, if I'm wide, this is your people who got that deep lordosis, pulling the shoulders down and back, getting that wide base of support, aka every power lifter you have ever seen. That is a normal compensatory strategy with a wide infrasternal angle. For the narrow, flip-flop everything. Narrow infrasternal angle, narrow infrapubic angle, sacral counternutation, an inhale position of the sacrum. If I have a counternutated sacrum, then what's going to happen is I'm going to have an inhale position in the thoracic spine, i.e. increased thoracic kyphosis. Also normal compensatory activity. A wide, flatter T-spine because they're in an exhale position, narrow, increased kyphosis because they're in an inhale position. Now here's where it can get tricky because you mentioned in both of these cases, Kevin, that you see an individual who has the same, or they have a wide and a narrow infrasternal angle, both present with similar thoracic spine presentations. Here's where it gets tricky. What I just talked about was a respiratory orientation of the thoracic spine. I.e., if I'm a narrow infrasternal angle, I'm good at posterior thorax expansion, which means that the thoracic spine is in more of a kyphotic or inhaled position. However, what can happen is, just like at the pelvis, I can have an anterior or a posterior orientation of the pelvis proper. I can have the exact same thing in the thorax. For example, watch me get really good posterior thorax expansion. Okay, so I exhale. I'm going to inhale. It looks like my kyphosis has increased, but watch this. Boom. Oh, snap, man. I just lost my thoracic curve. False. What happened was, from a, I hate saying functional standpoint, I have increased posterior thorax expansion, but then all I did was I took the thorax as a unit and I posteriorly oriented it, making me appear as though I have a reduced thoracic kyphosis. You can have the same thing for someone who's wide infrasternal angle. In theory, we have a reduced thoracic kyphosis or an exhaled thorax. I breathe in, holy cow, look at that pump handle for days. Then I do that. Well, it looks like I got really good thoracic kyphosis in that case, but in reality, all I did was take the thorax as a unit and orient it anteriorly. That's why some of the visual presentations can be confusing and not always consistent, depending on what infrasternal angle you see. The biggest and most important key when you are talking about any of these presentations, regardless of how it looks, is to trust your tests. Your tests are going to tell you where that person can and cannot put air. So if I have someone who is this, i.e. increased kyphosis, and they have full external rotation, and maybe a limitation in internal rotation, well, what that tells you is if I have an IR limitation, I probably need more pump handle activity. I explain that better in a different debrief, so I will link that debrief in the show notes. If I have someone who maybe is a narrow infrasternal angle, aka me, and I look like this, where I have a reduced thoracic kyphosis and my pump handle is way up, well, guess what? If I have an external rotation limitation, trust your tests, because that probably signifies that that individual needs posterior thorax expansion to achieve the goal. Where things get crazy is you can have someone who looks like they have a reduction in posterior thorax expansion, or maybe they're flat, but maybe they don't have a shoulder rotation limitation that matches that. Someone who's got a flat T-spine but can't IR the shoulder, but has ER for days. That individual you would still treat by getting air in the front, even though visually it may not look so. That's what they need. Big key, regardless of your presentation, is to trust your tests to inform your decision making. It's very hard to, one, change how someone looks visually, but two, also trust yourself that, yes, they made that change and it looks better. If we can use more reading, that can give us better decision making pre and post intervention, because a lot of those measures are a bit more objective than, say, appreciating someone's visual presentation. So to summarize, narrow infrasternal angle mechanics are typically have an increase in thoracic kyphosis or a inhaled thorax position. Wide, it's usually an exhaled thoracic position or a reduction in thoracic kyphosis. But realize that the thorax can orient as a unit, and that can mess up what you see visually. The key in either of these presentations is to trust your tests, make sure you get a dynamic infrasternal angle, put air where it needs to go upstairs, and you ought to be in business. So Kevin, I hope that clarifies things. Great question. The last question comes from my homegirl, Kelly. Hang on. Katie St. Clair. Hang on, let me answer Katie's question, maybe. How do you prioritize and coach pump handle expansion when someone is in supine and says they still feel posterior expansion? Great question. That's from Katie St. Clair on Facebook. Hey, Kelly. What I would do, Katie, if you want to emphasize pump handle, get them further overhead. That could be the difference maker, because that eccentrically orients a lot of this stuff in the front, may allow for you to feel more air there. Just a thought. Good question. Kelly's question. As my knowledge base keeps growing, it's also making me increasingly skittish/paranoid of wanting to ever build workouts/strength training programs for people without knowing more than I know. Basically, I'm aware now more than ever that reinforcing, trying to add strength before someone has minimal compensatory strategies is risky business. I don't know, maybe I'm overanalyzing, wondering what your take is on this. How do you decide what is safe to train on versus people that need to start from ground zero and just do breathing-based things? Motor control takes time for anything and takes practice, so in some instances, maybe letting people jump in is safe, but seeing what shifts throw people off is really making me question this now. What are your decision-making things? Kelly, that's a really, really good question, and I'm glad you asked this question, because I think a lot of people, when they dive into some of the stuff that I talk about or other people talk about, they think of people as being fragile, who are not allowed to move until they achieve certain joint ranges of motion, among other things. And I think that this is completely and utterly false. Here's why I think it's completely and utterly false. When we're measuring someone on the table, that is one given context. When I am watching someone do a squat or train in the gym, that's another given context. When I'm watching one of my boys go ahead and hoop and make it rain buckets, that's another context. We can't say that because an individual can do X on the table, that they should be able to reproduce that same thing both in the gym and in life. Those are all different scenarios that require different movement contexts, different movement strategies, all types of different things. To say that someone has good movement on the table doesn't mean that they can't express that when they're upright. On the flip side, someone may look really pretty upright, but look terrible on the table. I have examples of people like that all the time. You can have people who maybe have worked with me in the clinic after we've restored movement variance with some of these individuals, and we have them get up and try something in standing, and it just does not look good. Maybe they can't squat, maybe they have a hard time hinging into a deadlift position. Just because the movement is present on the table doesn't mean that they will execute a given task in standing. On the flip side, I don't know if y'all follow my boy Pat Davidson, but bruh, he moves really well when he's got weight underneath him. His squat is unbelievable. It looks so good. Deadlift, dang. Press, holy shnikes. You get him on the table, if that was the first time you ever saw him, would you let him do that stuff? You'd be like, oh my gosh, he can't rotate in any direction. How am I going to allow this man to squat? Context matters. That is the most important thing. And if we're talking about maybe trying to improve someone's movement variance or movement capabilities, I really don't see a difference between maybe something you would do table-based, which is a little bit more low intensity, versus something that is done in the gym or something that is done out and about in life. I'll give you an example. Katie, to the question that you asked me is how do you improve pump handle activity? Well, typically that involves moving someone overhead to allow this chest to expand. How is that any different than maybe coaching someone to do an overhead press while maintaining a good ribcage position? Sure looks the same. Or how is it any different than maybe having a pitcher throw a pitch with good mechanics? Wouldn't all of those allow for the pump handle action of the ribcage to increase? Can you not get someone better by doing an overhead press and that maybe changes table measures? Sure, I've done it.
Just because something doesn't look good in one context doesn't mean that they might be great in another. Do not have that fear of getting someone doing things in the weight room, in your case, Kelly, just because they can't do certain things on the table. Maybe what you're doing, though, is you're picking positions or activities that maybe complement what their needs are on the table or are within their capabilities of things that you are going with on the table. For example, what I might do with some individuals is I might coach some type of reach and some type of squat pattern as their first tier activities when I'm working with someone from a movement variability standpoint. If those look good, then you can use those two basic things as a marker for where to go next. If someone can squat great, then it's probably okay to teach them a deadlift. Bilateral moves are obviously safer than unilateral moves. If someone can press horizontally, then maybe you can slowly work your way vertical, or vice versa. If someone can press vertically, maybe you can work your way down to horizontal action. If two-legged activities look good in the weight room, maybe you can progress them to a split stance and then single leg. And we could argue the same thing with arms. It's all the same thing. The only difference is table testing is much less intense than gym-based stuff, which is more intense. And then life-based stuff, or maybe sport, that's probably the most intense. But they're all doing the same things, just under various intensities and contexts. As long as you can, in the gym, coach things to make them look pretty on the table, choose tests or choose activities that correspond with whatever movement you're trying to drive, and make sure those look pretty. And then when they're doing whatever they want to do, make sure that looks pretty as well. And by pretty, I mean they exhibit good mechanics and aren't having any pain, discomfort, or anything like that, and they're performing at their maximal capacity. If you do those things, most people ought to be safe. I don't think that, and I think it's unwise of us to just spend the bulk of our time focusing on one area without touching the other. Can I not build fitness, and maybe like even an aerobic standpoint, while simultaneously doing things to improve movement variability? Sure, if you got enough time, why not? Can I not emphasize getting freaky strong in a weight room? Maybe I'm doing a hypertrophy program, but then do things to make sure I don't lose too much movement capability as I'm doing that. Absolutely. It all blends together. The biggest key is making sure you choose the right moves for an individual that they can execute with good technique, feel it in the areas that they need to feel, and it helps push them towards their goals. To summarize, Kelly, the key difference between all of these things where we're testing people is context. You have to appreciate how someone executes a task in all given contexts. And if it looks good in one context, but not another, go ahead and milk that context. Maybe that's the weight room for all it's worth, and then get them better at the other one. Kelly, unbelievable question, and I think that's a good stopping point for us tonight. I want to thank you all for tuning in. You've been an outstanding audience. Wow, we had 13 people. That's incredible live. If you want to find out more about me and what I teach, here's what you can do. First, go to zachcouples.com. While you're there, I want you to go up into like the right side of the screen and sign up for my newsletter, because you're going to get a ton of free stuff. Free? Yes, free. You're going to get about 4.5 hours of me chatting. Aaron, my pleasure, my dog. 4.5 hours of me chatting about breathing or pain. 50 pages of notes. You're going to get a free, yes, free, acute to chronic workload calculator. You're going to get an email from Big Z every Friday showing y'all what's good and what's hip on the internet. Those are some of the benefits of being one of the fam in the newsletter. Also, when I start releasing products, which probably going to happen next year, yes, that's going to happen, you guys will be the first to get my discounts, so you probably want to become one of the fam. While you're on my website, you'll probably also want to sign up for some services with me. I offer 3 currently. First, movement consultation. Maybe you're toy, not moving as well as you'd like to. Maybe, Nick, thank you, my man. Maybe you're, kind of stiff, sore. You've tried to work with some other practitioners. You're wondering, you know what, maybe if I just move a little better, life would be good. Well, I could be your guy for that. What we can do is I will take you through a full movement assessment. We'll address your movement limitations. We'll make sure that they correspond to the goals you want to reach, and we'll get you going. Definitely sign up for a movement consultation with me. Next, I offer mentorship programs. Maybe you want to learn how to apply some of the stuff we talked about today with your clients. Maybe you want a better understanding and appreciation of anatomy. And maybe you're having a hard time coaching these activities and you want to know some tips and tricks so your people can move better and meet their goals. I can be your guy for that. Definitely sign up for my mentorship program. What we do for that is we talk face to face. It's a nice back and forth dialogue. I ask you questions, you ask me questions. We both get better. And most importantly, our clients get better. Definitely sign up for that. Last thing, maybe you're post-rehab and you are, maybe you've been doing like the table stuff and you feel unsafe going to the weight room. Well, I want to squash that for you because I offer online training. I write you monthly programs. We go back and forth on feedback. I make adjustments accordingly, and that's all preceded by a movement consultation, so we tailor everything specifically to your needs. Definitely sign up for online training. Once you've scoured ZachCouples.com, you might want to subscribe to me on iTunes or Stitcher, The Zach Couples Show. Because guess what, folks? There's 62 other debriefs. You might not want to see me for all of them. Maybe you do. I don't know. But go ahead, bring me in the car. Bring me on a long car ride. Bring me on a short car ride. I don't care. Definitely sign up for me on iTunes and Stitcher. That's The Zach Couples Show. Leave a review so we can make the fam grow. After that, let's check me out on social media. I'm on Facebook, /ZCouples. My Twitter handle is @ZCouples. I'm on that Instagram, baby. Zach, ZAC, Couples, CUPPLES. And last but not least, go to YouTube, search Zach Couples, hit subscribe to that because there's a gang of exercises that you can get that I don't really talk about anywhere else. Thank you all so much for tuning in. You've been beautiful, sexy, and outstanding. I want you to keep it real, but not to the extent when things go wrong. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving, and I'll see you next time. Deuces.